The soil remembers every secret you bury, the shovel that found a name. It began with a phone call I should have ignored, the kind that comes late, wrapped in static and dread, as if the wires themselves had been convinced to carry something they shouldn't. "We're digging again," the voice said. Out past the willow, there was no introduction, no need. I recognized the voice before the sound, in the way one remembers a scar before the wound. I hadn't been back in years. Not since the night the ground swallowed her name and refused to give it back. And yet, when the call ended, I was already packing my coat, the one with soil still trapped in the seams. The old road curved like a question, each bend a memory, shadow, a whisper I'd tried to forget. And when the willow appeared, bent, gnarled, its bark etched with grief, I knew nothing had changed. Not here, not really. Time doesn't heal land. It buries deeper. The shovel waited where I left it, rust along the edges, handle worn smooth by guilt. It was never just a tool. It was a witness to every promise broken, to every truth shoved 6 feet beneath, and tonight it wanted to remember. I approached the mound, new dirt, soft, still warm. Who had been here? What had they tried to hide? The soil told no lies, only stories. And when I pressed the shovel in, the ground sighed, not resistance, permission. With every heave, something old stirred beneath my ribs. Not memory, not quite, something prior. An ache passed through bloodlines, silent and precise, a whisper buried in bone marrow. We never left. Then the metal struck something. Not wood, not stone, something softer, more deliberate, wrapped in fabric, bound in twine. I knelt down, brushing the dirt away with bare hands, and there it was, a small bundle, no larger than a loaf of bread, wrapped in black linen, with wax, no name, just a symbol pressed into the wax, a spiral. It's always the spiral. My hands trembled, not from fear, but recognition. This wasn't the first, it wouldn't be the last. Someone had continued the ritual. Someone had remembered, even when I tried to forget. I carried the bundle to the porch of the caretaker's house, the one no one lived in anymore, but that never stopped creaking. I lit the old oil lamp. Its flame guttered like it knew what was coming. Then I unwrapped the bundle. Inside, a letter, a tooth, a lock of silver hair, and a name carved into a sliver of wood, marrow. I had never heard the name, and yet it knew me. My breath caught in my throat, the kind of stillness you feel when a dream crosses into waking life and leaves its fingerprints. I ran my fingers across the word, not, carved, scratched, frantic, desperate, as if the name itself had tried to escape but couldn't finish the scream. And then the wind howled through the broken window, not cold, not loud, just pointed, like it was looking for someone, and it stopped right behind me. I turned. The porch was empty, but the chair in the corner, the one that rocked on its own, was still. That had never happened before, and in its stillness, I felt something awaken, not outside, inside. Something had followed me here, not from the road, but from the grave. I had just opened. I whispered aloud, "Who is Marrow?" The lamp flickered once, then again, then the flame stretched toward the ceiling like a breath held too long, and on the wall, cast by the twisting flame, a shadow, not mine, not human, but familiar. The soil remembers, even when we don't. And sometimes it doesn't wait to be asked. It answers in shadows, in breath, in the stillness of a rocking chair that finally stops moving. I picked up the letter, unsealed it, and read the first line. "You buried me once, but not deep enough. Now I remember where you hid the others." I dropped the letter, but it didn't fall. It hovered, midair, weightless, and then slowly descended, landing not on the ground, but in the exact place I'd unwrapped the bundle, like it was returning, or waiting. The spiral had begun again, and this time it wasn't just a memory, it was an invitation, where the wind carried the names. The wind had never spoken so clearly before. It didn't rush or howl. It delivered, measured, exact, as if carrying syllables on invisible strings, and those strings pulled something behind my ribs, something with a name I used to fear, but the name wasn't mine. Not yet. It belonged to Marrow, or maybe Marrow was never a person. Maybe it was a warning or a debt. The letter still sat on the porch where it had landed, on the edge of moonlight, just far enough away to make me question if it had really hovered, but I knew it had. Some truths don't need witnesses. They leave residue, and my fingers still tingled where they had touched the wax seal dot inside. The words had shifted, literally, when I opened the letter again. The ink bled in reverse, retreating back into the page as if afraid. Only one sentence remained. The wind remembers more than the dead do. I stood there for what felt like hours. Time wasn't real here. It hadn't been since the first body we buried without a name, the one we never spoke of, the one we pretended hadn't screamed. But the soil didn't forget, and neither did the wind. They were siblings. One carried the secrets. The other whispered them back when no one was listening. I left the letter behind, walked back toward. The wind guided me, each gust nudging me in a direction my memory refused to validate. And then a voice carried on the air. 6, 7, 8. A child's voice, counting, soft, playful. Dead. I froze. The clearing ahead opened like a wound, and at its center, stones, flat, unmarked stones. But I knew what they were. The others. The ones before Marrow, before the spiral. Before we learned to bury truth in pieces, each stone pulsed with something unsaid. Not quite energy, not quite sound. More like a presence, one that didn't need form to be felt. And one by one, they began to hum, a harmony of forgotten voices, a lullaby for the silenced. And then movement, not from the stones, but beneath them. I stepped closer, careful, respectful. The air grew colder, not freezing, but precise, like grief that had finally found the right room. Then something caught my eye. A scrap of red, tucked beneath one of the stones. I knelt, lifted it gently. A ribbon, faded, frayed, and burned at the edge. I didn't recognize it, but my body did it. Stiffened, my jaw clenched, and a sob rose in my throat without permission. I held it close, expecting scent, memory, echo, dot, but instead, laughter, a giggle. Just over my shoulder. I turned sharply. No one, but something had been there, close enough to exhale against my ear. The ribbon tightened in my grip, and in that moment, I remembered, not clearly, not completely, just enough. A girl, too young to die, too small to carry such sorrow, and yet she did, and I helped bury her, not out of malice, out of obedience, because the spiral told us we had to. The ribbon belonged to her. Her name was, it escaped me again. The wind shifted. Another whisper. Never called her by it. That's why it slipped. Unspoken names dissolve faster than memories. But the soil held everything suddenly. The earth beneath my feet trembled. Not like an earthquake, like a sigh. Oh, release. And then a small hand reached up through the grass. Fingers, curled, dot, delicate child, dash like dot, but not dead. Remembering, I staggered back, not out of fear, but reverence. This was not horror, it was reckoning. The earth wasn't punishing me. It was returning what I tried to forget. The hand disappeared, vanished, as if it had only come to remind me what I'd buried. And then I heard her name, not out loud, not even in my head, but behind my ribs, etched into the rhythm of my breath. Celia, that was her name, Celia, the girl who wore the red ribbon, the girl I left without a marker. The wind howled then, but not angrily, more like applause, a recognition that finally someone had spoken what the ground had held for too long. I collapsed to my knees, not from grief, from weight, the kind that only memory brings when it returns without asking. And then I heard the footsteps, not behind me, below, like someone pacing beneath the ground, slow, measuring, and with every step, a whisper. 10, 11, 12. Counting had resumed, but it wasn't playful now. It was deliberate, marking something, a ritual, a warning, or a countdown. I looked around the clearing. The stones were glowing, dim, soft light, pulsing in rhythm with the counting dot, and in the center, a new stone where there hadn't been one before, fresh, still damp, from the soil. No name, but a ribbon tied around its base, red, frayed, burned. I didn't tie it there, but someone had, or something, and beneath the ribbon, carved faintly into the rock, the wind carried the names. The soil buried the silence. I'll speak. I opened my mouth, but nothing came, and in that silence, the spiral returned, not in sight, but in sound. A low, rhythmic humming, circling my ears, drawing tighter, calling, and the wind. Now, a breeze again, lifted gently and carried the name I'd whispered Celia into the trees, and for the first time in years, they answered. Their branches swayed, not with wind, but with memory, and I knew the others were listening now, and they would no longer stay quiet. The roots that remembered faces, the trees never forget. They don't move, but they witness, and in their stillness, they gather more than shade. They gather truth. Roots stretched not just into the earth, but into memory, and tonight they stirred, not from wind, not from rain, but from recognition. I stood at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed on the ribbon-tied stone. The ground around it pulsed softly, like a breath beneath the soil, and I could feel it, the hum of something aware. Celia's name still lingered on my lips, but saying it had changed something, like a door had opened beneath the surface. Okay, and now the roots were listening to. Beneath every grave, there's more than a body. There are echoes, regrets, unspoken oaths, and there are faces, not buried, but absorbed. The soil is hungry, yes, but the roots, they are curious. I moved toward the tree line, drawn by something I didn't recognize, but couldn't resist. The branches hung low, but they didn't block me. They parted like curtains to a memory I never meant to revisit. Inside the grove, the air shifted, cooler, still, soundless, except for my breath and the distant thrum beneath my feet. The trees were tall, not ancient, but watchful. Each bark bore lines that looked too much like scars, and some even resembled faces, not carved. Groaned. I reached out to touch one, drawn by a knot in the wood that looked unmistakably like an eye. The moment my fingers made contact, the entire trunk pulsed, and in the space behind my eyelids, visions. A boy, wide-eyed mouth, full of questions he never got to ask, running through this very grove, chased, not by a person, by a shadow, and then nothing. Only silence, and the slow, gentle fall of a ribbon from his hand to the base of a tree. Red, frayed. I stumbled back. The vision faded, but not the feeling. He was still here, not in body, but in bark. The tree had taken him in. Not just his death, his story. I turned slowly. Now that I was looking, really looking, I saw them faces in the trunks. Dozens, some serene, some screaming, some watching me with wide, hollow eyes. These were not carvings. These were remains, root memories. The grove was a library, and each tree was a tombstone with a pulse. And then I heard it. A voice I knew. You planted them. I turned. There she stood. Celia. Not the girl I remembered. Older, but with the same eyes. The same red ribbon in her hair. She smiled. It wasn't kind. You didn't mean to, but you did. My mouth opened. So no words, only guilt. You buried what you were told to forget, and the roots held on, 'cause they knew one day you'd come back to listen. She walked toward a tree with a gnarled, split trunk. Inside it, a face twisted in anguish. He was the first, she said. You never learned his name. I remembered the day, the rushed burial, the whispered warnings. Say nothing, God. Just dig. I had obeyed, and now the tree remembered the face I had tried not to see. Celia placed her hand against the bark. It glowed, not light, something deeper. Recognition. They're not angry, she said. Just waiting. For what? I asked. She smiled again. For their names, for their stories. For you to stop pretending silence was innocence. I dropped to my knees. My hands dug into the soil, not to bury, but to feel, and below the surface, the roots pressed back, not threatening, reaching, they twined around my fingers, wrapping like memories long denied, and in my mind, the stories came. A mother who gave birth in the woods and never left, a brother who vanished during a storm and was never found, a lover who followed the spiral willingly, believing it would bring her closer to the divine. Each one had a tree. Each one had a name I had helped forget. Tears streamed down my face, not for them, for me, because now I understood. I was not just a witness. I was a gardener of forgotten truths, and the grove was my garden till Celia knelt beside me. It's not too late, she whispered. To do what? To speak, to remember out loud, to plant differently. The trees began to hum, low, steady, a choir of rooted memories. And then, behind the trunks, figures emerged, not ghosts, not phantoms, not impressions, like the wind had shaped bodies out of memory. And the grove had decided to give them form. They stood in a circle, watching, waiting, each one bore a spiral on their skin. Each one carried silence like a weapon they had been forced to sheath. I rose, faced them, and one by one, I began to speak. The names, not all, not yet, but enough to make the roots shift with joy, enough to make the trees weep, sap like tears, enough to make Celia smile. Not with cruelty this time, but with peace. And above us, the canopy parted, not from wind, but from release, as if the grove itself had exhaled for the first time in decades. I looked to Celia. She was fading. Where are you going? I asked. Nowhere, she said. I've always been here. You just stopped looking. Stepped back from the trees. The faces in the trunks had shifted. Some now smiled. Others simply watched. But none of them screamed. Not anymore. The roots had remembered the faces. Now it was my turn to carry them forward. The letter that returned without ink. Some letters are never meant to be written. Some are born from silence, not ink. They arrive not in envelopes, but in echoes. You don't find them. They find you. And when they do, they rewrite the parts of you you thought were unwritten. The grove behind me still whispered. The roots had stilled. The faces in the trees no longer stared. They had passed their stories to me, and in that moment, I thought I had fulfilled my part. I thought remembering was enough, but the spiral had other plans. When I returned to the porch, the first letter was gone. In its place, a new one, unsealed, unmarked, but pulsing like a heartbeat made of parchment. I picked it up with caution. It was warm, not in temperature, in presence. It wanted to be read, but not aloud, Not yet. I unfolded it slowly, and that's when I saw it. There was no ink, only lines, indented into the paper, as if written with pressure, but no substance. Words that had never been drawn, only pressed into existence. I tilted the page toward the moonlight. The grooves shimmered faintly, and one sentence revealed itself. I did not die where they buried me. My breath caught. The statement wasn't a metaphor. It was literal. Someone had been buried alive, and not just anyone. Someone I had known. I scanned the rest of the page. Dozens of impressions, unwritten, unreadable, but felt. Each groove tugged at something in my ribs. A memory, a voice, a face I had trained myself to forget. And then, behind the letter, a shadow, not cast by light, cast by recognition. I turned slowly. He stood there, half-formed, like fog with bones, and he held nothing, because his hands had been bound. His face was familiar, not from love, from guilt. He had been part of the ritual, not a participant, a sacrifice, one who had been chosen without consent, because the spiral always demanded silence, and he had asked too many questions. Remembered him now, Jude, a boy with too much light in his eyes. He believed in digging for truth long before we were taught to bury it, and for that he was punished. The whisper came without sound. They buried the body, but the soul crawled back. I dropped the letter, but it stayed in my hand, clung to my skin like a scar. The grooves began to shift beneath my fingers, moving, rewriting themselves as I watched. A new sentence emerged. You were the last one I saw. Staggered, my knees hit the wood, because it was true. I had been there, not digging, watching, told to stand guard, told not to flinch when the soil resisted, and I hadn't. I stood still and let them bury a boy whose heart still beat. Jude's shadow stepped closer. He didn't accuse, he didn't scream. He simply waited. Waited for what? A name, truth, an apology. I spoke his name. Jude. The wind stopped. Even the trees silenced themselves. He looked up and then smiled. You remembered, he said, not with a voice, with breath. That strange inner sound only the dead can produce. When they haven't fully gone, the letter in my hand dissolved, literally, flaked away, like ash, and scattered into the night air. But the grooves, they remained, etched into my palm, invisible to the eye, permanent to the soul. Why did they do it? I asked. He didn't answer. He only pointed. Not at the ground, at the well. It stood beyond the porch. Old, dry dot, or so I thought. But now it hummed, low, steady, like a throat clearing before confession. I walked to it slowly, every step heavier, not from dread, from remembrance. The last time I had stood here, I was younger. We all were, and the well had been full, not of water, of stories. It was where the spiral tested. Loyalty, where secrets were whispered down into the dark. If the echo returned, you were clean. If not, you were removed. Jude had never echoed, and that's why they took him. I peered into the well, expecting darkness, but something shimmered at the bottom. Not light, reflection, my face, but altered, older, hollow, dash-eyed, wearing. The spiral across my brow, and behind my reflection, Jude, his eyes glowing, his lips mouthing words. I couldn't hear, so I whispered down to him, "What do you want me to do?" And this time, the well echoed, but not with his voice. With mine, screaming, I fell back, the sound still ringing. It wasn't an echo, it was a recording. The well had kept it. My scream, the one, had never released the night they buried him. The scream. I swallowed to stay alive. Now it was loose, and it burned. It echoed through the Nanesque trees, through the ground. through my bones, and I wept, not for Jude, for who I had become to forget him. When I looked up, he was gone, not faded, freed, and on the edge of the porch, a new letter. This time, written in ink, just one word: thank you. The mirror beneath the soil. Some mirrors don't reflect the face you wear, but the one you buried. They lie beneath your footsteps, waiting for the weight of memory to crack the surface. And when they break, they don't shatter, they reveal. Held the letter in my hand, its single word seared into my palm like a soft absolution. Thank you. A strange peace settled over me, but only for a breath, because when you thank the living for remembering the dead, you're inviting them to see what the dead never stopped holding. I walked away from the porch, back into the woods, guided not by the path but by a tug, a pull below my ribs, soft and steady, like a compass made of guilt and something older. The trees whispered as I passed, their voices softer now, less accusatory, not forgiving, but willing to let me pass deeper, where the stories went when even silence grew tired. I reached the oldest part of the grove. The air was damp here, not with rain, with presence. You could taste it, metallic, like memory had blood in its mouth, at the center of this forgotten circle, beneath a canopy that let no light through. There was a patch of ground that refused to hold grass, only black soil, smooth, undisturbed, but not empty. I knelt. Something told me not to dig, but to listen, so I pressed my ear to the soil, and what I heard was breathing, not like lungs, like wind trapped in a mouth that was never allowed to scream. I whispered, I'm listening now. The ground vibrated, dot, just once, and then a cracked dot, then dot, silent, but unmistakable. The earth opened, not collapsed, revealed a single line split the center of the patch, and beneath its glass, a mirror, perfect, untouched by time or decay, set into the soil like a buried eye, watching the roots grow above it. I brushed away the dirt carefully, as if waking something that had never slept. When the glass was clean, I saw my face, but it wasn't mine. It was me, but younger, wearing the uniform, the emblem of the spiral etched across my chest, and in my hands, a shovel, and behind, Celia, still, wide-eyed, watching me bury something she wasn't supposed to see. The mirror pulsed, and the image changed. Now it was Jude Pound, silent, looking up at me from a shallow grave. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear the words until I pressed my fingers to the glass. Then they echoed. You didn't stop them. You became them. I recoiled, but my reflection didn't change. It followed, moved when I didn't, watched when I closed my eyes. The mirror beneath the soil wasn't glass. It was truth, and it was alive. I tried to speak too, argued to apologize, but the mirror didn't respond. It only kept showing, scene after scene, moment after moment, where I had chosen silence, because it was safer than honesty. I saw the boy with the red thread, the girl who carved spirals into trees, the friend who asked questions and never came back, each one a face I had buried, each one a mirror I had refused to look into until now. And then something shifted. The mirror invited me not to watch, to enter. The soil beneath my knees turned, soft, warm, not from heat, from memory. It recognized me, not as a visitor, as its eye didn't fall. I sank slowly. The soil wrapped around my arms, my chest, my ribs, and pulled. The last thing I saw before the mirror swallowed me was Celia, standing at the edge of the circle, smiling, not in triumph, in sadness. "You're ready?" she whispered, and then darkness, but not empty. No, the world beneath the soil was full of voices, faces, pages of stories that had never been written, because no one survived to tell them. And I walked among them, Or maybe I floated. Time didn't pass here. It paused to give the forgotten a chance to speak. The first to approach me was a woman, her face half-formed, like a memory interrupted. She pressed something into my hand, not a weapon, a brush, and whispered, "Paint me as I was, not as they told you." Then came a child, holding a spiral made of ash. She crushed it in her palm, let it fall like dust. "Not everything buried needs to stay," she said. One by one, they came, not to haunt, to test, to ask, "Are you willing to carry us now, even if it breaks you?" And I answered, not with words, but with my spine. I straightened. I stood. I let the mirror reflect not the man I had become, but the one I was becoming. The one who dug not to bury, but to unearth. The soil began to rise around me again, not to swallow, to release. I emerged, gasping, back in the grove, on my knees, palm bleeding from pressure, and in the blood. Letters carved without a blade, a message from me to me. Don't forget again. The mirror was gone. The earth had closed, but inside it remained every reflection, every truth buried beneath my ribs, waiting to be seen by someone brave enough to ask. I rose, faced the grove, and saw them. The faces, clearer now, no longer screaming, simply watching. I wasn't their gravedigger anymore. I was their mirror, and that terrified me, because some reflections you can't turn away from, even when the eyes in them look just like yours. The spiral that led me home. The spiral is not a path you walk. It is a path that remembers you. You don't follow it. You are summoned by it. And once you step into its curve, you are not returning to where you began. You are returning to what was hidden at the very center of what made you leave. The ground had closed. The mirror was buried once more, but something had changed. The earth no longer rejected me. It welcomed my footsteps, softening beneath each one, not to swallow, but to guide. I walked without thinking, not toward the house, not toward the trees, but toward something older than memory, older than guilt, home. But this home wasn't made of walls. It was made of turns. The deeper I went, the more the forest curved in on itself. Roots arched like ribs, branches looped like thoughts, turning to the place they were first denied. And soon I saw it, a symbol carved into the bark of a dying elm, not freshly made, but pulsing, alive. The spiral, not perfect, not clean. It bled sap like a wound. I reached out. My fingers didn't touch bark. They touched remembrance, and the tree responded. The spiral glowed, only faintly, and then dash opened. Not the tree, the space behind it, a narrow path I had never seen, or rather, a path I'd always avoided, because it led not outward, but in. I entered. The forest dimmed, not from shade, from intention. The trees here weren't just witnesses. They were guardians of what had been hidden when forgetting became survival. The spiral path coiled. It's tighter, each turn smaller, more intimate, and at the center a cabin. Not grand, not ruined, just waiting. My breath caught, because I knew this place, but only in dreams, only in that half state between sleep and confession. The door was ajar. Inside, dust, silence, a chair, a table, a cracked mirror, and on the wall, photos, not in frames, nailed directly to the wood. Dozens of them, some blurred, some torn, but every one was of me. Me at different ages, me in moments I have forgotten, or tried to dot me with people whose names had faded, but whose eyes still haunted. I approached one photo in my hand, reached for it as if pulled, and behind it, a whisper, not a voice, a breath. The house exhaled, and I remembered. This was where I'd first drawn the spiral, not in allegiance, in confusion, a child's sketch of something he couldn't name but felt. A shape that emerged whenever I was scared, or silent dot or alone. I had drawn it on paper, then on the table, then on the wall, until someone saw a dot and took me. Not in violence, in training. They said the spiral was sacred, that had been chosen, that those who drew it unprompted had been marked. I believed them because I wanted to matter, and that's how they made you stay by convincing you that silence was purpose and forgetting was love. The spiral didn't lead me home. It built a home around me, and then taught me to forget that I had ever lived outside it. I sank into the chair. My hands trembled, because the house was not just a place. It was a test of whether I could remember and not run, of whether I could sit in the silence and hear what it really meant. The cracked mirror faced me. I looked into it, expecting my reflection. Instead, saw her, Celia, but younger, and behind her, a version of me, smiling with a lie in my teeth. I pressed my palm to the mirror, and this time, it spoke. A sentence formed in fog on the glass. You came back, but will you stay? The house held its breath. The spiral beneath my feet pulsed, and I understood this was not about finishing a journey. It was about claiming it, about saying, this is where I broke, and this is where I will build. I stood, and for the first time in years, I whispered my full name. Not the one they gave me, not the one I earned in silence, but the original, the name I had before the spiral, before the rituals, before the forgetting. And the house shuddered, not in collapse, in recognition. Dust lifted, photos fell, the table cracked, and beneath it, another spiral, drawn in chalk, still faint, still alive, and in its center, letter. I opened it, and this time it was addressed to me. From me. If you're reading this, you remembered. And that means you're strong enough to forgive the child who wanted to belong more than he wanted to survive. You were not weak. You were made to believe that love required silence. Now speak, not for them, for you. I folded the letter, set it on the chair, and walked out. Not because the spiral had ended, because it had begun again in a different direction. I wasn't free, but I was awake, and the spiral no longer led me. It walked with me like a shadow that no longer needed hiding. The chair wasn't empty when I left. Some chairs are not meant to hold bodies, only the weight of what they once carried. They creak not from pressure, cut from memory, and when you rise from them, you don't leave them behind. You leave something of you still sitting there, waiting, watching, remembering. The letter was folded neatly on the seat, the spiral beneath. The table had faded. The house no longer shook, but something in me still trembled. I stepped outside, believing I had closed the door. But some doors are not made to be shut, not when the silence behind them has finally learned to speak. I walked back toward the spiral path. The trees no longer bent away. They watched me with a stillness that felt more like mourning than judgment. They knew, they remembered, and still they let me pass. But after a few steps, I felt it, that pull, faint, soft, not like the soil had called me before, but like the chair had something left to say. I turned. The cabin looked the same, but now, flicker, through the dusty window, I saw the chair, cube-eyed, a figure, still, shrouded in shade. I should have run. A part of me knew this wasn't a haunting, it was a confrontation. I re-entered the house. No wind, no noise, just that presence, seated, waiting, as if I had never left, as if he had always been there, because it was me, not metaphorically, not symbolically me, as I had been the day. I left the spiral behind, uniform pressed, eyes hollow, hands clean, but never innocent. He looked up, and for a moment, we stared at each other. Two versions. One who had learned to forget. One who had learned to remember. He spoke first. His voice wasn't cold. It was flat, drained of inflection, like sermon memorized too well. "You shouldn't have come back." "Said nothing," he continued. "You were safe out there, believing in half-truths in distance. Now look what you've done." Stepped closer. The chair didn't creak. It growled. Low, low wood, shifting like breath held too long. "I had purpose," he said. "I kept the order. I kept the silence. Okay, see, you've undone everything. Still, I didn't speak, because I wasn't here to argue. I was here to witness." He leaned forward. His eyes weren't angry. They were afraid. "You remember everything. They'll come for you again. And this time, you won't be a child." I finally responded. Soft, even. "I know." He stood, and now I saw it. His hands were stained. Not with blood, but with ink. The kind used on parchment that never reached daylight. The kind that signed oaths meant to silence the soul. "They made me sign it," he whispered. "They said if I didn't, she'd disappear, that no one would ever find her. So I buried it, and I buried her." Key reached into his coat, pulled out a paper, frayed, faded, and handed it to me. It was a map, but not of land, of memory, a spiral drawn in looping layers. Each line a moment I had sealed away, and at the center a name, Celia. "She didn't run," he said. "They made me say she did. And then they made sure no one would ask." Tears fell from his eyes, but they turned to dust before they reached his chin. He looked around the cabin. "This place isn't real, you know. It's what you needed to remember, but it won't last." He stepped away from the chair, and for the first time it creaked, relieved, grateful. "Sit," he said. "Okay. And decide. Will you become me again, or will you carry what I couldn't?" I looked at the seat. It still held the weight of what had been denied, but it also held something else. Now permission to rewrite, to reclaim. I sat, and in that moment, I saw everything, not in flashes, but in flow, like the memories were not returning. They were unfreezing. The night Celia vanished, the ceremony in the orchard, the whispers and the whispers in the dormitories, the scrolls in the hidden library, the spiral carved into the underside of every desk. The code they had taught us to hide in plain sight, to obey, to never question, and most of all, to make sure no one else ever did. And I had done it because I thought I was protecting something sacred, but I wasn't. I was protecting their silence. The figure, the other me, nodded and began to fade. "Remember me," he said, "not as a traitor, as a fragment. You're whole now, and I can rest." It was gone, but the chair remained warm, and the spiral beneath it complete. The house began to dissolve, not crumble, release like it had served its purpose, and now it, too, could be free. I stood, and when I stepped outside, the spiral path was straight, leading not forward, but upward, back toward the world that had forgotten, and the truths I could no longer bury. But as I walked away, I didn't look back, because the chair wasn't empty when I left. It held the ghost of who had been. And sometimes that's the only grave you ever really need to visit, the house that returned without walls. Some houses don't collapse. They dissolve. They do not fall. They fade. And in doing so, they leave only what could never be built. The feeling of what once stood there, even when no one believed it had. I walked away from the chair, but the chair did not let me go. It followed, not in form, in weight. A ghost without a face, a truth without a witness. I stepped out into the spiral path. Now, it no longer spiraled. It unraveled like a thread, pulled too long from the hem of memory to ever be wound again. And still, I walked. The forest had changed, not visibly, but in tone. It no longer whispered like before. Now, it echoed, not voices, but presence, as if the trees remembered the shape of someone they once feared, and now they watched to see what that shadow had become. that someone was me, or who I had been, or who I had buried. I wasn't sure anymore, but I kept walking because something was calling me back, not to the place I left, but to the place I thought didn't exist anymore. It was the house, but not the one from the spiral, not the cabin of memory, the real house, the one that had disappeared the day I chose silence over search, the one that vanished when Celia did. It stood now where no house had. Stood before Dot, in the clearing where we had once whispered our fears, where we drew spirals in the dirt before we knew they meant submission. But the house was different. It had no walls, no ceilings, no doors, just furniture, arranged perfectly, as if the walls were still there, as if someone still believed they could contain what happened inside. I froze, because this was not reconstruction. It was confession, like the earth had regurgitated the memory, not as a symbol, as evidence. A table, 2 chairs, one of them broken, a mirror cracked, a stove cold but still smelling of pine smoke, a single bed, no sheets, and in the center of the room that had no room, a rug, stained. I stepped onto the rug. It didn't shift. It held, like it knew. I'd return, and beneath it, bare dirt. I knelt and began to dig, not frantically, not fearfully, but deliberately, as if my hands already knew what they would find, and they did first. A box, wooden, unmarked, sealed with wax. I opened it. Inside, here, Celia, single quotes, is braided, like the day she disappeared, wrapped in a cloth that bore our symbol knot, the spiral, the countermark, the one we etched in secret when we still believed we could escape the spiral's grip. I set the braid down, and the soil beneath its side. I kept digging. Next, a book, leather, bound, torn at the spine, pages missing, but some remained, and on them names. Dozens in 2 columns, one labeled seen, the other buried. In hers was the last next to seen, crossed out and rewritten under buried, different handwriting. Someone had changed the story, not just for her, for all of them. I stood, the rug now sunken, as if it had waited years to be lifted, as if it had waited for me. The house whispered, not in threat, in plea. Finish what they started, but not the way they taught you. I turned. The mirror reflected only fog, until I breathed. And then her face, not afraid, not sad, but tired. And still, she smiled. I reached out, touched the glass, but it wasn't glass anymore. It was skin, cold, worn, still alive. The mirror pulsed once, then melted, not down, out, like a sheet of light spreading across the furniture, touching each object like a farewell. And one by one they faded, not disappeared, returned to where they had always belonged, beneath the soil, with the other secrets, with the others who were never seen again. I remained in the clearing alone, but not empty, because now I carried them, all of them, not as burdens, but as truths. The forest began to stir, and at its edge, a figure, not Celia, not the man in the chair, a child, me, at the age I first drew the spiral, eyes wide, palm bleeding from trying to erase what couldn't be erased. He looked at me, took a step, and spoke. Are you going to leave me here again? I knelt, held out my arms, and he ran into them. For the first time, I held the part of me I left behind, not to console him, to honor him, because he had survived. Alone, not afraid, and stilled, he waited. We stood, and the house was gone, not vanished, freed, its truths no longer needing containment, because now they walked with me, and the soil whispered one last time. The walls were never meant to keep you in. They were built to keep them out. But now you carry what matters, and what you carry will never be buried again. The last name buried wasn't hers. Some names are never spoken aloud, not because they were forgotten, but because They were never allowed to exist. They were swallowed in silence, carved into no tombstone, and buried beneath stories that were safer to believe. But the soil remembers, and it keeps whispering until the one meant to listen finally kneels to hear. The clearing was empty now. The phantom house had dissolved, leaving behind nothing but a patch of earth that seemed cleaner than the rest of the forest. To clean, like someone had raked away the guilt but left the shame behind. I stood in its center. The braid, the ledger, the melted mirror, all gone, but something else remained beneath. Just beneath. I pressed my hand to the dirt, not digging this time, just listening, and it pulsed once, then again, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. The child, the younger version of me, was still beside me. He didn't speak. He stared at a point on the ground just a few inches to my left, eyes wide, fixed, like he saw something my adult self had long unlearned to see. I turned to face it, and for the first time, I noticed it. A stone, stood half, buried, small, unassuming. But it wasn't just any stone. It was carved, roughly, not with a name, with a symbol. One I hadn't seen since the night everything changed. It wasn't a spiral, nor the countermark. It was a line, split down the middle, forked at the ends. It's like a tree broken at the trunk, but refusing to fall. She made that, the boy finally whispered. Not for her, for you. My breath caught. What do you mean? It wasn't her they buried, he said. Not at first. I dropped to my knees, brushed away the earth, and there it was, second box, identical to the first, but heavier, and locked. There was no key, no clasp, just a seam, then a resistance that felt more like memory than metal. I pressed my palms against it and listened. At first, silence, then a whisper. One word, not Celia, not the others, just Elias. My name, not the one I used now, the one I lost, the one they told me to forget the night I was remade. I gasped, fell backward, and the child, he didn't flinch. He nodded. They buried you, he said. That night, when you said no, when you tried to help her, when you failed, I shook my head. I didn't, but I couldn't finish, because I did. I tried to run, tried to pull her from the circle, tried to stop the binding, and when they caught me, they didn't punish. They erased. The box pulsed, a glow at its edges, not light, something deeper, like the feeling of being remembered by something you had forgotten how to love. I opened it. Inside a uniform, mine, folded perfectly, with the crest torn off, stained with something too dark to be ink. Beneath Ida, photo, me, and Celia, not, posed, captured, laughing, running across the orchard. Before the spirals, before the whispers, before the binding taped to the back. A note in her handwriting, still sharp, still alive. If you're reading this, then you've remembered. And if you've remembered, you know it wasn't me who was lost. It was you. They let me go because I made them believe they'd already taken everything. But they didn't. They left you buried alive. And now you're the only one who can dig the rest out. I cried, not in sorrow, in recognition, because finally, after all this time, I knew what the soil had been trying to say. The last name buried wasn't hers. It was mine. The clearing shivered, like the truth had shifted the foundation of everything. And then I saw them. Not spirits, not visions, top people, dozens, emerging from the tree line, eyes wide, hands dirty, each one holding an Itoma book. A ribbon, a broken locket, a pair of shoes, a torn page, a candle burned down to its base. Memories, not of the dead, of the erased. And each of them looked to me, not for answers, but for permission. I stood, held up the photo, and said, the only thing I could, your names matter. Your pain matters. You were never lost. You were buried. And now we dig together. they began to hum, not a tune, a tone, low, resonant like the sound of roots breaking free, like the vibration of stone. Q, being taught to remember, the ground beneath us pulsed, and from it rose monuments, not grand, not carved, just simple stones, each with a name, real, raw, restored, and mine was among them, Elias, beneath it. A symbol, not of the spiral, not of the line, a seed, cracked, sprouting. The child smiled, stepped back, and faded, not gone, just grown. In me, I remained among the monuments, among the names, not to mourn to guard, because some graves, they don't need to hold bodies, just the truth, the garden we were never meant to see. Some places aren't hidden, they're guarded, not by fences or signs, but by silence, woven so tightly that even memory dares not cross. But every silence, given time and breath, becomes soil, and soil eventually blooms. The field of monuments now stood quiet, dozens of stones, each marked with a name that was never allowed to live, each name now reclaimed by the ones who carried them, and among them, mine. Elias, the name I was never supposed to speak aloud again, now etched in earth, rooted, alive. The people had returned to the woods, not to hide, to plant, to plant. Each carried a seed, from their box, from their loss, from the part of themselves they were told to burn. I remained by the last stone, the one that bore my truth. I waited, not for a sign, but for a season, and when the soil warmed I knew it was time. I returned to the place where Celia and I had first broken the rules, not the orchard, not the spiral, the well, the one they told us never to approach, because it whispered. God, it still stood, covered in vines now, but not dead, not dried. Breathed, slowly, like something buried, still exhaled beneath it. I stepped to the edge, looked down, and the darkness didn't frighten me, because this time I carried light, not a torch, a name, not mine. I dropped the braid, not in grief, in honor. It spun as it fell, like a ribbon curling, mid-air, and vanished, not with a splash, but a pulse, as if the well had taken it, not as an offering, but as a return. The vines, Quivered, and from there, green flowers, tiny, white, fragrant ones. I remembered from the corners of Celia's dress, the ones she always plucked and tucked into books she was never allowed to read. I wept because something had heard, something deeper than stone, older than rules, wiser than the spiral, and it had not closed the well. It had waited behind me, footsteps, soft, uneven. I turned, and there she was, Celia, not ghost, not girl, woman, alive, no aging, no time, just presence, like she had always been here, waiting for me to finish digging. She didn't speak. She smiled, held out her hand in it a single seed, but not for her, for me. I took it, pressed it to my palm, and suddenly I knew where to go. Back to the clearing, back to the place where the house had stood, where the rug had lifted, where the mirror had melted, where I first remembered the earth was soft, no shovel needed. I knelt, dug with my hands, and placed the seed inside. No prayer, no chant, just truth. Around me, wind stirred, but not cold. Awakening, like the trees exhaled in recognition, and the soilet shivered, then stilled, then bloomed, not overnight, but immediately. Petals opened like eyes, roots spread like stories, and what rose from that earth wasn't a tree, or a flower, or a vine. It was a garden, but not like any I'd known. This garden had no fence, no beginning, no border. It stretched endless, each plant different, each color new, each scent familiar, because every bloom was a memory. Celia stood beside me, tears down her cheek, not for sorrow, for freedom, because now we could name the things we were told to forget. And then they came. The others, not just the ones I'd seen, more, hundreds, thousands, carrying seeds, carrying songs, carrying names. The spiral had broken, not shattered, transformed. Now, it was not a trap, it was a path, leading to the garden, to the place we were never meant to see. 'Cause it held everything they couldn't control. Love, loss, memory, truth, choice, and above all return. I looked to the sky. Clouds parted, not in drama, in acceptance, and the sun didn't burn. It warmed. I turned to Celia. She nodded. We weren't meant to stay buried. I nodded back. We were meant to grow. And from that day forward, person who wandered too far, who heard whispers in the dirt, who carried a name no one believed, found their way here, to the garden, to the place where silence becomes soil, soil becomes truth. Some secrets aren't meant to stay hidden. Some graves aren't meant to stay closed, because some names, unspoken, plant something no one can bury again.